They banged the gavel and told me I had 30 days to rehome the only friend who had ever stayed when everything else left Barnaby. Brenda Collins, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA, smiled like it was a job interview and said the motion passed, and in that single sound, my life lost the one warm, dumb, golden thing in it. I left that clubhouse feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my whole adult life, like somebody had confiscated the oxygen from my apartment and handed me a bill. My name is Mark Taylor, and I live in 70B, a tidy beige condo in a neighborhood that likes hedges measured in inches and mailbox flags approved by committee. Barnaby is a 6-year-old golden retriever who thinks thunder is the sound of the universe clapping for him. We were a team, mornings bad espresso and dog hair on my suit. Nights, his snoring as a metronome for my thoughts. I should have known the HOA existed. Of course, I signed the covenants when I bought, but you don't actually see a governance until it turns into a machine that moves against you. Brenda Collins is the machine's face wire-rimmed glasses, a wooden gavel she treats like a deity, and the kind of small-town authority that grows teeth when fed petty complaints. One meeting, Amendment 4B, about pet weight and nuisance, and my living room became a crime scene. I stood up because I had to stand up. I showed the photo on my phone Barnaby on his back paws in the air. The kind of stupid, blissful dog photo that makes you believe cute can be law. Brenda read the notice about proper posting and how procedure was followed. She said it flat. You could hear the rectangles of policy clicking into place. There were 5 of us in that room, and 2 of them were asleep. The motion passed. 30 days. My throat closed around a wordless panic I hadn't felt since the economy hit, and I lost a job that used to define me. I spent the next 3 weeks flailing calls to lawyers who smiled and said, HOA covenants are like a private little republic, which is to say, yes, you signed your own leash emails to neighbors, tons of denial. I loaded Barnaby into the car and drove 3 hours to my sister Emily's place in the country. He bounded out of the car like a comet and didn't look back. He was fine. I was not. There was a point 2-3 nights of that terrible thin sleep where you try to convince yourself you're being dramatic, when I almost gave up. I pictured Barnaby in a shelter, or worse, gone for good because I couldn't wrangle bureaucrats. I imagined the HOA's smiling newsletter with Brenda on the cover, Your Dues at Work, and I wanted to crawl under the couch and stay there. I asked myself in the dark, quietly, and with real fear, am I being ridiculous? Is this about me being petty? Would anyone remember me if I just left? The self-doubt is corrosive. It smells like failure. For about 24 hours, I almost let the silence win. Then I read the covenants properly, not the page you sign and toss, but the actual legal-looking meat of it, Article 7, Section C, Prohibited Pets. They had a list, any dog or cat over 40 pounds, any pot-bellied pig, any venomous wildlife. They had designers and lawyers who could write a rule for every shade of mailbox. And, in the margin of that long list, something that looked like a typo or a bureaucratic oversight, there was no mention of equines. No ponies, no miniature horses. A heady, ridiculous thought planted itself. What if I got a certified emotional support animal that they had no rule for? What if the law, the Fair Housing Act, actually forced the HOA to make a reasonable accommodation for a disability and my anxiety about losing Barnaby was just that, a real injury? It's the kind of desperate small-town legal theater you see in movies where every loophole is a last-ditch oxygen tank. I could almost laugh at myself for thinking it. Then I called Joe, a farmer 2 states over, and bought a miniature horse named Buttercup. People close to me thought I'd lost it. Emily texted things like, "You can't be serious," and "Where will it live, Mark?" My living room was 900 square feet of reality. My backyard was a 15 by 15 parcel of HOA manicured grass. But for once, desperation bred solidarity. I hired 2 local guys, Sam and Roy, who worked like men who'd been fined by Brenda before. In fact, they had for an unsanctioned truck leak. They came with a truck that looked like it had been repaired with string and determination, and when I told them my tool shed needed a dirt floor and a Dutch door and a hay trough, they stopped staring at me like I was insane and started laughing, the kind of laugh that smells like conspiracy. They built a shed that looked like a miniature cedar cathedral to spite. The more ridiculous the plan sounded, the more real it became. Buttercup arrived all sloppy winter coat in July, and a face that suggested he knew how to hold grudges. He was 20 inches short and 70 pounds of pure opinion. On our first afternoon together across the street, Brenda stepped out watering her prize-winning petunias. Beige, beige, beige. And Buttercup locked eyes with her like she'd personally offended his ancestry. He bolted, tore across the cul-de-sac, and performed the single most humiliating act a protest could. He pooped on her white azaleas and then started eating them. Time narrowed. Brenda's watering can hit the pavement, and she marched towards us with a calm that looks like a tank about to blow. I smiled, the kind of smile that felt like steel, and said, "That's a very threatening frolic, I guess." Buttercup chewed another petal. That ridiculous small victory, poetic and childish, exploded into real consequences. A police cruiser showed up 2 days later when Buttercup wandered into Oakwood Boulevard and started licking a parked minivan like it was an ice cream truck. I was walking down the street in a tie and pajama pants, chasing a horse with a granola bag in my hand, while a veteran cop with a mustache looked at me as if I'd invented a new kind of embarrassment. He could have written me a ticket. He didn't. "I'm letting you go with a warning," he said, "because no one wants to write a ticket that will be a headline." But the video of Mark in flannel pants and a tie of a miniature horse in a cul-de-sac hit the neighborhood Facebook and then like a spark in dry grass spread. Brenda hired Dwayne Cheatham and Howe, a law firm with a name like a joke and invoices that are not, and sent me a cease and desist with fines retroactive $200 a day, creation of a farm-like atmosphere, unsanctioned livestock-related structures, and my personal favorite, unspecified olfactory violations. My bank account did the little death wobble. Emily called and said very practically, "You have to get rid of him, Mark. You're going to be bankrupt." I held the letter and thought they weren't trying to get Buttercup. They were trying to make me give up. This wasn't about a horse. It was about control. And then something terrifying and beautiful happened. People I hadn't spoken to beyond hi in the elevators started showing up at my door. Mr. Henderson from 12C. The gentleman who had seemed asleep at every prior meeting told me he'd been fined twice for a lawn gnome that posed a sonic threat. Sam and Roy came back not for money but to stand behind the thing they'd built. We decided to fight not because laws always win, but because sometimes communities wake up when embarrassed and outraged enough to care. At the emergency meeting Brenda called where she planned to publicly humiliate me and approve more legal action, I brought Buttercup in. He wore a little blue ESA vest I'd bought online. The room smelled like stale coffee and the cheap vinyl of meeting chairs. People shuffled. Brenda had her lawyer on speaker. She read the charges like a priest reciting sins. I interrupted, "Excuse me, I am anxious. I need my support." The room collectively inhaled. Buttercup took one look at the lawyer's screen and, sensing tension like a weather vane senses wind, did what he does best. He dropped a generous, unmistakable heap of manure on the welcome mat in front of the podium. Silence. Like the moment a record scratches, then a wave of something that wasn't laughter exactly but recognition. Mr. Henderson slammed his cane and said, "Enough. You've been ruling this neighborhood with fines and not with neighbors." One by one, people stood and told their stories, charged for an aggressive wind chime, forced to repaint a mailbox, 3 times fined for non-conforming paint palette. The meeting melted into truth. This had never been about the rules, it had been about Brenda's taste and her hunger for small authority. We voted ad hoc, messy, loud to repeal Amendment 4B and to put Brenda on probation stripper of the gavel demand a board election. It wasn't legally pristine. It was a mob of people fed up with a petty crown. The lawyer stammered. Brenda's face emptied out like a bank account. She left clutching her laptop, dignity evaporating. I didn't throw a party. I didn't do a victory lap. I walked out of that room with Buttercup at my side and Barnaby already at Emily's safe and felt a strange, tired relief. Brenda had lost her practical power. She was unseated, humiliated, and suddenly very mortal. And that's where my story ends, with a petty tyrant exposed and a community that chose not to be ruled by small cruelties. I rehomed Buttercup to a farm where a little horse could be a little horse. Some fights don't need to be permanent monuments. The lesson I dragged out of the muck and the manure is simple. When rules become tools for humiliation, the only sane response is to make a louder, weirder noise. Stand up, fight the small cruelty, demand community over control.